What is up, you guys? Diggerdan here, coming at you with another video. Today, I'm doing a book review on World War Z, written by Max Brooks. So without further ado, let's dig into it. Now, for those of you who don't know, World War Z is technically a movie. You can even see here in this copy, it was soon to be a major motion picture. And I didn't realize this, but you know, in Hollywood, usually if a movie is based off of a book, they usually take some liberties. In this case, with World War Z, it looks nothing like the book at all. The only similar thing, aside from the title of World War Z, is the fact that there's zombies in the world, and that is it. Everything else is very, very different. And this book is very, very different, and I actually really enjoyed this book because part of the title that I kind of skipped is World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war. So basically how this is set up is that there's like a journalist, like an American journalist, kind of going around to different survivors around the world, kind of taking their firsthand experience and their different, whatever role they played in the Great Zombie War, in whatever hemisphere or country they were in at the time. So you explore America, because Max Brooks, I believe, is an American author. The most, I feel like that's kind of typical. We actually explore Jerusalem, we explore Iceland, we explore Russia, we explore a lot of the different countries. In one country that, I only named a couple, but one country that we didn't visit that I was hoping we would was Australia and or New Zealand. I know they get clumped up together, and I know you guys don't like that, so sorry. But yeah, shout out to all my Aussies, because I feel like you guys always get overlooked in fiction. But anyway, so like I said, that's the synopsis. And so these first-hand accounts happen 10 years after the conclusion of the zombie war. So some of these events could have happened 15 years ago or so, depending on where you are in the world. So it's not like things just happened, and obviously it's after the end of the zombie war. So that means humanity survives. So that takes out some of the tense moments a little bit, or deflates them maybe a little bit, or like the stakes aren't as high. But Max Brooks wrote in such an incredible way that, like the Battle of Yonkers, for example, without getting into spoilers, if you read this and you've listened or watched or read the Battle of Yonkers, you know what I'm talking about. That was like a first-hand account of a soldier that was at the Battle of Yonkers, and it was very tense, even though obviously the journalist, I forget the journalist's name, I don't even know if it's mentioned actually now that I say that, the journalist is speaking with a first-hand survivor, a first-hand soldier that was there and survived, and obviously he's giving his account, so it's like that soldier survives, but still Max Brooks does it in such a interesting way where it still feels very tense, and it's like, is this guy gonna make it? I don't know. But in the back of your head, you kind of know it's like, obviously he does, because he's here to tell his story. So it's kind of that back and forth where it's like, my logic is telling me the tension doesn't really exist because they make it, but then the events that the survivors portray and describe is just very grotesque sometimes, because it's zombies, right? So it is very horror-ish. So yeah, World War Z is definitely like kind of body grotesque horror-ish, I would say. It's not necessarily like psychological horror, maybe a little bit when they kind of start talking about like dogs and like family. So it's horror, I'll say. I talked myself into saying it's horror. And if you've watched me for a while, you know I kind of steer away from horror. I don't really like horror. But World War Z, like Max Brooks, he did it right. I don't know what else to say. So I guess that's really all I'm going to say before I talk spoilers. So before I even do that, my overall score for World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war, is a solid 7.1 out of 10. There's some very, very high highs, and there's a lot of mediocre slowness that I was a little bored. So that kind of averaged out to a 7.1. So I definitely dig this book. I definitely recommend giving it a try, especially if you're kind of interested in the movie and like it was interesting but didn't really feel right. This is a completely different experience. I know during that time there was a ton of zombie mediums or media, I'll say, Like obviously you got The Walking Dead. You've got like countless video games, like The Last of Us. Um, so there, I know zombie at the time was very oversaturated, and I feel like this is one thing that many years later, after the zombie craze is over, I feel like this definitely holds up because I think this was originally written in like '06. Yeah, this was written in 2006. So this was kind of the start, or maybe even before the zombie craze. Maybe this helped contribute to that. I'm not sure. But there's a reason if it did, and this is phenomenal. So, all right. So if you don't want any spoilers for this book, I would click off now. Like I said, I definitely recommend reading it. And if you don't care about spoilers, or if you've read the book and you know what I'm talking about, let's dig into them. So if you've watched any of my reviews before, that you know I like to rate 5 certain categories, and then I take an average of those 5 categories to get my overall score. So like I said, overall score is a 7.1, but the first category I like to rate is emotional impact. And emotional impact I rated as a 7.8 for World War Z. For me, which is actually pretty high. Because another thing I like to say, anything over a 5 for me is something I dig or something I enjoy. And anything like a 5 or below, I actively don't like. So 7.8 is pretty good. So like I said, the stakes are not really all that high because you're talking to survivors. You know humanity wins. You know, especially like towards the end, they kind of talk more about it where it's like humanity is still fighting the zombie hordes, but they're managed for the most part. Now humanity is starting to thrive again, and so that's good. But since it's like first-hand encounters, like I said, go back to the Battle of Yonkers. That was probably the most emotionally impacted short story, I'd say, because these are basically short stories. Like that one was very tense. Like having the soldier describe like his frame of mind when he was seeing these hordes, like this endless horde of zombies just coming through. Like they're throwing bombs and everything at them, and like they're going down, but they're just an endless horde. They just keep going and going, and they literally run out of ammo just due to poor planning, and just like knowing, and like he's in all this overuse equipment. It's like he's in body armor even though he's against zombies. It's like what's a ballistic, like they're not shooting ballistics at the soldiers, right? So it's like, why am I wearing this ineffective body armor? Just as an example. So again, Max Brooks, I think, knows how to create tension really well in logically in a section where tension shouldn't exist. Another great example of like high tension or high emotional impact I like to give, or I like out of the book, is I think it's in India. I forget the characters' names, but there's just like one soldier that is like, I'm basically a meter maid. Like I shouldn't be here. I'm supposed to help evacuate, but like this colonel, he saw me in uniform. He's like, you get in this truck, we're gonna go drive. And then they drive and then see the general, and then basically they're trying to press this button to blow up the bridge so zombies can't get through, even though they're still waiting. They're still technically supposed to still wait for all the people that are trying to evacuate get across the bridge. But they're like, if we don't do it now, then zombies are going to get through, and it's like, what's the point of evacuating if the zombies are going to catch up? So then the general, badass that he is, he's like, fine, I'll take it, my responsibility. He goes and presses the button, and then nothing happens. So he's like, well, shit, what do we do now? And the general, without missing a beat, he's like, all right, you guys go, help these people evacuate that are getting across. I'm going to go and just blow them up manually. And so it's like, oh my god, that's such a good character moment too, for even a character that we've only really see for a couple of pages. So again, very high tension, and you can feel this guy, entry-level meter maid soldier, he's like, why, I don't want this on my conscience, and he feels bad, and he's like, we can't blow this up yet, people are still trying to get across. So it's like kind of dealing with that, like doesn't want to murder people, but also doesn't want the big picture to be gone, because if they don't blow it up, then zombies are still getting through, right? So again, we know that at the end of the day, humanity survives, but still in these little snapshots, these little scenarios, the tension is very, very high, and I applaud Max Brooks for that because he did a phenomenal job. Now, like I said, towards the end, some of them I was getting less and less excited about, because it was less about the fight again, or like dealing with or learning how to fight against the zombies, and things were kind of dwindling down, like the zombie numbers were dwindling down, and things were becoming more and more manageable. And then it kind of came down to like bureaucracy, politic BS that I didn't really care for as much. I mean, I did appreciate it because it did make a lot of sense. Like, for example, like with America, they had the great push back to like basically the West Coast, hiding behind the Rockies, and then when they were slowly making their push back to the East Coast, and then having like just, but all the politics, like there were a couple stories with politics revolving around that. The politics I didn't really care for as much. It was something that I think really shines is when you focus on these individual character stories. Like there was one where it was a woman pilot, I forget her name, but she was doing like flying to the East Coast or flying for something, but something happens and she gets sucked out of her airplane. Her airplane goes down and she's alone, and all she has really is the clothes on her back and like a radio that was at her waist. And so she's talking in this radio, and there happens to be someone on the other side with a ham radio just in their cabin, and this is like their whole point, like to help find for search and rescue. And like, so that section, if you remember that section, that was probably one of my favorite stories. And it's basically just her against this endless horde of zombies between where she's at and where evac is, or where evac plans to be. And it's basically just her and this other girl on the radio on the other end. Like, that was her saving grace. And then later it's revealed the military can't find who that saving grace person is. There's no record of that person with that call sign or with that name or at that location. So she's like, I'm not crazy. She was actually there. So it's just like, that was like an oh crap moment for me. It's like, did that actually happen, or was this just kind of all in her head and it was like a survival technique? Like her mind kind of took over and like for the fight or flight, So there's a lot. And those are just to name a couple of situations. Max Brooks is a phenomenal tension writer, I'll say. Character writer. Makes me care about the person and really makes me like buy into that person in just a few lines. And I think something that really helps too is that the journalist, before the first eyewitness person is giving their account, the journalist is giving a synopsis saying, oh, this is Mr. Miyoto and from Japan, and he's currently this years old, and this is currently what he's doing, and he looks old, and like a little description so I know what it is. And then they kind of jump in like, I was not proud of who I was at 18 or whatever it was, So again, Max Brooks is really good. It was just kind of that politics stuff towards the end that pulled me out of it. And after, like, closer to the end, when it was like more and more clear humanity's going to survive, and like the tension was kind of brought down lower and lower, I was caring less and less, I found a little bit. So that's why emotional impact is a 7.8 and not much higher, like me excitedly talking about it make it sound like it should be. So characters, maybe a little lower than it made it sound like I should, based off what I was saying with emotional impact. But characters I rated as a 6.3. So I do feel like this is a significant downgrade from emotional impact. And a lot of this is because the characters that we saw, I really liked, but I wish we got to see more time with them. And when we did kind of get to revisit them at the end, I kind of forgot who they were. Like, the only thing I really remember is the location. Like, there was, like, Denver, Colorado we met a few times. There was a couple of spots in Japan we met a few times. There was, like, Cuba that we did a couple times. But it's, like, a lot, like, the characters themselves, I don't remember their names. I don't remember ethnicity or what they were, like, what their position was, really. A lot of times, and then once I really kind of caught back up, realizing, oh, it was this person. This was this guy that was in the submarine, or whatever it was. By the time I remembered, I'm like, okay. So that's maybe more on me for not giving as much attention and remembering than when we got to revisit them at the very end. But then when we did revisit them at the very end, it was basically them just saying goodbye. I think that last chapter is literally called Goodbyes. So it was kind of a wrap up, which was kind of good, but I almost wish it didn't happen. I just wish there was maybe a couple more first or different people with first eyewitness just giving their account to kind of make it wrap up more naturally. But that's just my personal taste. But yeah, 6.3. It's just, I feel like we needed more time with them. And I feel like with basically mashing a bunch of short stories together with no real plot, which in my next section I'll talk about. I just wanted more. So yeah, characters 6.3. All right, now plot. This is my third category I like to rate. This is easily the lowest thing I rated at a solid 6 out of 10. Again, like I said, there's not really a plot. The synopsis is a journalist going around gathering people's first eyewitness accounts of the zombie war, and that's really it. It's not really us understanding. It's not really point A at the beginning of the book to point B at the end of the book where humanity is making a plan to fight this zombie horde or the zombie infection, whatever you want to call it, and then they fight through it, and then they're on the up and up in the end. I mean, there's sort of that very loosely, but it's not in the traditional like beginning, middle, end structure that you get in most stories. So that kind of pulled me out of it a little bit. But something that kept me in it is just the emotional impact, gut punch in a lot of these short stories or in these first-hand accounts. So yeah, there's a very loose plot, I'll say. But the little plot that we did get, I actually did enjoy. That's why it's a 6, not 5 or lower. So not much to say there, but solid 6. Now, the next section I like to rate is dialogue and prose. Now, dialogue and prose I rated as a 7.2 out of 10. So again, much more positive than the last two sections. Something that I really enjoyed that Max Brooks did is that, for the most part, not necessarily all the time, but for the most part, I did feel like, without necessarily hearing audio, it did feel like in these different stories from different people, it felt like different people were talking. Not all the time. It sounded like just kind of generic insert person here spewing story, but a lot of them it did feel like they had different voices. Now, whether that's from their background and what they're talking about, like in one of the Japanese people that were talking, I forget his name, but it was like the guy that was like kind of stuck on his computer and like hated, like didn't want to be off the internet, like that guy. And then towards his story, he was evolving. Like he had a distinct story, or excuse me, a distinct voice compared to like the guy that was talking about Yonkers. You know, like sometimes the guys like, or like if it's a man or woman talking, like I could feel that through the story or like through their account. You know, so I did appreciate that. Something I didn't really care for was I feel like there was a lot of swearing for just swearing's sake. Now, I do swear in my own personal life, so it's like, it doesn't really bother me, but I feel like some of it was excessive. And again, maybe that comes down to characterization. Maybe that's just the soldier who has a potty mouth is just ripping him because that's the way he talks. And I felt that a couple times, but other times I just felt like it was excessive. It's like, why are we dropping F-bombs? Where it like had little impact on it, you know? So didn't have much of a punch. It was just like, okay, that was there. That didn't need to be there. I don't know. And I know that sounds really nitpicky when it's a zombie book. but I don't know. I didn't really care for the excessive swearing. And another thing, too, is, like I said, it's just something that the way the story is structured, where they're kind of interviews, where it's like the journalist or the narrator asks a question, and then, like, not the victim. I keep saying victim. They're not victims. But like the first-hand accountant, or the witness, that's the word. But the witnesses, and then they answer the question, and they kind of just go off memory, like this was my experience. Like that is an interesting structure, and something I did like. So that was another point for it. But then sometimes when it was like jolting, when it feels like they were in the middle of the story, and some of the stories just ended. That was kind of jolting sometimes, and I didn't really care for that. But yeah, overall, dialogue and prose was easy to understand. There was some even humorous spots, which I appreciated. So yeah, solid 7.2. Now, the last thing I'd like to rate is world building, and I rated world building as an 8.2. So this is easily the best thing, in my opinion, about the book. Now, world building is interesting with this book because it's set in the real world. It's set in the United States. It's set in China. It's set in Russia. It's set in Jerusalem. Like, it's set in different locations across the world. So basically, Max Brooks is taking our world in what if zombie apocalypse happened, you know? So cool concept, but also is very cool seeing through a different character's eyes or through different people's eyes from across the planet of different like people's biases. Like especially today, like the climate with like Israel and Palestine. That was actually an example in World War Z, pretty early on. In kind of the climate again today with like Pakistan and India. They share a border. They're kind of at each other's throats. Again, that was another example in the book of how that might play out if there's maybe a third threat that they have to team up together about, things like that. Or like Cuba, for example, an island where they, like, once they eradicate it, that they can not have to worry about zombies and they can select who comes on their island. So they were living good, and now at the end of the book, they're a superpower, in economic superpower, which is crazy because they go from communism to a form of democracy, capitalism. You know, so it's like all these really cool different things. It's basically a big what if in the world. And like I said, with this being written or being released in 2006, the political climate is way different than what it is today in 2024. So I just was eating it up, and I love the world building. World building, usually one of my favorite things about a book. Or if a book has really good world building but like poor characters, I can forgive it usually. Where if it has really good characters and maybe really poor world building, I'm not as forgiving. So I guess I'm more of a world first reader. But yeah, I think Max Brooks did a phenomenal job with world building. I think, just like I said, the hiccups with the characters and with the plot a little bit kind of brought it down, but this is still a very solid read and an easy dig or an easy recommend. So what do you guys think? Have you guys read World War Z? Have you watched the movie? And if you've done both, tell me which is better. In my opinion, it's easily the book. I just think it's such a unique experience, with it's like a journalist in first-hand witness accounts, that it's just completely different than your usual things. So, and in a zombie, again, normally I don't like horror, normally I don't care for like zombie in your face stuff, but this one was done really well. So what do you guys think? I'd love to hear you guys in the comments. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you. If you want to see more from me, Diggerdan, please hit that subscribe button as well as that bell notification icon so you guys know when I upload each and every single time, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.